This is an examination of leadership in The Wild Swans for LAS 583 Cross-Cultural Approaches to Leadership. This is a fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen from Denmark in 1838. And it centers on a girl, Eliza, and her brothers who are transformed into swans, and she has to break that spell to free them. There are a few versions of this story throughout Europe, but the one that we'll be focusing on takes place in a castle. They're a royal family. Eliza is the youngest daughter. In lower class families, the story has 2, maybe 6, but for ours, there are 11 brothers that are born before Eliza. A stepmother moves in, is jealous of the affection of the king, transforms the brothers into birds, different. In other stories, again, sometimes eagles, sometimes crows. For the royal family, they turn into swans. And Eliza is covered in walnut juice so the king doesn't recognize her and sent out into the wild. She does find her brothers after conferring with an old woman in the woods and learns how to break the spell. They fly her across the ocean to another kingdom where she gathers nettles that burn and sting her as she goes in complete silence to transform these nettles into shirts, which she then puts on the swans to transform them back into humans. But there's a complication because the king suspects her of witchcraft. So it's only as she's being taken to her death that her brothers find her and she transforms them and has her happy ending. And looking at the origin of this story, we see it take place in mostly European countries, also in Libya. And it seems that it could correlate with the overtaking of the Gauls by the Roman armies. This is a period when the sons of the rakes, the leaders in Gaul, were being sent to Rome or were dying in battle. So there's this sense of loss of the sons. When the Christians take over the same sort of terrain, that's when the attack on nature knowledge came into play, because God was the one who set the course. And so we shouldn't try and shift that by using nature. During both of these sort of overtook the idea of Freya, the Nordic goddess of intuition and magic, using those elements of nature to heal and to understand the future. And so they were both silenced, this voice, which was a role played by the women and daughters in these societies. And seeing the horizontal leadership that was taking place with the sons, this puts the center of the issue outside of the self. You're viewing from the outside area to support the needs of others in a collaborative way of making decisions. Usually there's a small community that is taking time to get together, see the needs, and make a change. And that's what we see with the brothers in their swan state. The eldest brother does usually speak for the group, but speaks with the phrase we and us. And there is freedom within the group as well. The youngest brother will stay behind with Eliza when the others go off. It flies above and shades her from the sun. And so we can see that there is some independence even within this group structure. Looking at the hierarchical leaders, we have the archbishop, which accuses Eliza of witchcraft when she's gathering nettles to break the spell, and the king, which sends her away for looking unattractive to him. So these are both self-centered, where they feel a risk or threat to themselves and didn't consider the needs of Eliza or why she was doing what she was doing in those roles. When the brothers join together, they're able to accomplish a lot. They are able to take Eliza safely across to another kingdom. They keep her from being killed by gathering around her in the cart. So they have this group decision-making that's followed by action, which is used to protect those or assist those who are at a disadvantage. When we look at the story of Sky Woman, or the charm in the reading we did with Archibald, we see the same sort of collaborative leadership and using the strengths of others at their own choice to make change. This also was a connection to nature in the story of Sky Woman, where she used the resources that were available around her. We see this also in the wild swans. One notable example is when they're crossing the sea. 1 hour each day, the swan brothers transform into their human selves. And this is a risk at sea because they wouldn't be able to fly. And so there's a little rock that they can stand on for that hour until they are turned back into swans and can fly again. And they use that as a place to rest during that trip. So nature offers a time to find peace. Eliza uses this even more specifically early in the story when she's away from her brother. She holds up a leaf with a hole in it to the sun, and it reminds her of her brothers looking at her, and it's comforting. The old woman that she meets in the wild offers her berries, and then later, when she's having her sort of intuitive dreaming, she finds the answer to break the spell is taking nettles, crushing them, and weaving them into cloth. And in the stream, it's the old woman that she met in the woods that gives her the answer. It's a fairy figure that provides the information. And this does relate back to Freya's role of the intuitive guide of the Gaelic people. And they also had a tradition of crushing nettles, using the fibers to weave cloth. So it's preserving an old tradition in this story as well. Now we know that this was a knowledge that was being sort of oppressed at that time. And something that resonates with us today and is important to remember with this connection of stories by Terry Wildling. She wrote, "You must not speak. That's what my stepfather said. Don't speak, don't cry, don't tell. That's what my mother said as well as we sat in hospital waiting rooms, and I obeyed, as did my brothers." Terry is writing about the wild swans and the message of having to endure difficulty. And during this period when Eliza is crushing the nettles and weaving it, her hands blister, her feet blister, but she bears it in silence because she knows her truth and her strength. Even when her life is at risk, she stands by her knowledge of truth and doesn't fall under that oppression of being misrepresented. It's interesting to consider that when her brothers do come down and she puts these shirts on them and transforms them back into princes, the youngest brother didn't have his shirt finished. And so for the rest of his life, he carries a swan wing. And so even when the story reaches its culmination, there's an aspect of change that's happened, and it shows that we aren't unaffected by these transformations that we go through. We can see that in other stories as well, like the story of Jumping Mouse. John Steptoe does a beautifully illustrated rendition of this, where Jumping Mouse meets a variety of animals who are struggling and gives a gift to them, his sight, his sense of smell, his sense of hearing, until he reaches this far-off mountain and has nothing left of himself, but is rewarded by being transformed into eagle. So this cycle of undergoing hardship and being transformed into something better and stronger as a way to find strength through our intuition and self. For this, I considered a number of references: Joanne Archibald, D.L. Ashleman, Arith Harger, Thomas King, and Terry Windling. I thank their considerations and contribution.